Gambling is a game based on guesses, but we need to minimize our guesses as much as possible, at least according to the risk-reward ratio. That's principle number 3, right? Number 3 equals guessing. So, obviously, when we're gambling, we're guessing. That's what we're doing, right? Gambling is just guessing. Now, it's obviously educated guessing. We're not just randomly throwing shit at a wall. But at the end of the day, we are guessing. We're guessing what's going to happen in the fight. Now, because the whole game is based on guessing, but we don't really want to guess, right? If we're just fully guessing, throwing shit at a wall, we're not going to be profitable. So what we want to do is minimizing those guesses as much as possible. We already have to guess. We can't get away from guessing, but we try to minimize those as much as possible. And what that means practically for you is that when there's unknowns happening in a fight, if there's unknowns coming into a fight, for example, like I mentioned in point 1, if a fighter intangibly, most of these unknowns will be intangibles for the most part, not always, but for the most part, they'll be intangibles. So most of the big ones. So let's say, if we're looking at somebody intangibles, like I mentioned earlier, if a fighter has had massive ACL surgery and they haven't fought for 2 years, well, that's a big unknown on how they're going to perform coming into their next fight, right? So essentially, you have to guess how they're going to perform. But it's a very, very tough guess to make. Some people come back from injuries and they look okay. Some people come back from injuries and they look terrible. This means you have to make a massive guess about how that fight is going to look coming back from that injury. It doesn't mean you can't make guesses, right? But understand what you're going up against. We need to make as little guesses as possible. I'd rather be in a position where I don't have to make any guesses. Now, that's not going to happen because every fight's different and there's going to be fights where you do have to make guesses. But for example, if we're betting on Khabib Nurmagomedov and he's been active over the last 3 years, we know that he is not coming off a 2-year layoff. We know that there's going to be no ring rust. And we've seen in his career, he shoots takedowns in every single fight. So when he's going against Dustin Poirier, we know he's going to shoot takedowns. We don't have to guess. We don't have to guess that, right? Another fighter, Francis Ngannou. Every single fight he's ever fought, he runs in the cage, runs forward to his opponent and tries to take their head off within the first minute, right? We don't have to worry about Francis Ngannou maybe fighting tentative. Now, he did that one time against Derek Lewis, but he's never done it in his entire career other than that, and that was after a loss. So, this is exactly proving my point, right? Let's say we know that Francis Ngannou is going to take someone's head off in the first minute, right? But then he comes up against Stipe Miocic, he tries to do it, and he loses. His first fight coming back from Stipe Miocic, he fights differently. But that was a guess we had to make, right? Coming back from the Stipe Miocic fight, we don't know how he's going to react because it was his first loss of his career. I think he lost in his second fight or something, but it was his first loss, basically, right? Against Cisse he lost, but it's his first major loss. We don't know how fighters are going to bounce back from their first major loss. Their first loss in the UFC. How are these fighters going to bounce back? Right? So even though a lot of people would have wanted to bet on Francis Ngannou against Derek Lewis, if you was abiding by principle 3, don't make guesses, then you would have realized that, okay, Francis Ngannou's a beast, but I don't know how he's going to perform in his fight after Stipe Miocic. That was a tough fight. It was a 5-round war where he kind of got exposed. I'm going to have to guess that he's going to be the same man. He might not be. Now, if you was abiding by this principle, you wouldn't have guessed. You would have passed on that fight and you would have saved your money because Francis Ngannou fought differently, right? So I'd rather bet on spots where I don't have to guess, right? Where it's easier because I have to guess anyway. So just try and guess as little as possible. Now, this is the caveat, right? It's fine to take risks and guess in MMA betting, especially when the reward is correct, but only also if the reward is correct. So, for example, if there was some unknowns coming into the Derek Lewis fight, Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis, because of how he performed in the Stipe fight, we don't know how he's going to return after that, right? But if Francis Ngannou was plus 400, well, then it's way easier to take the guess, right? If he's plus 400, then I don't mind having more guesses, right? But if he's minus 110, well, then it's a completely different conversation. So the amount of guessing that you should do is going to directly correlate with the value or the perceived value on the line. So just make sure you understand that, right? You can still guess, just make sure that the reward is worth the risk, because you are taking a risk and you might not get the reward. It might not win, but you definitely are taking the risk, but you might not win. So just make sure that the reward is worth the risk. I see people laying big prices on fighters that are making their debuts against veterans. And it's like, yeah, okay, maybe they're gonna win, but, and I'm guilty of this as well, right? But it's a big risk to take when the reward is maybe not that big if they're minus 300 or so. I did it on Daniel Zellhuber. I'm pretty sure I bet on Zellhuber against Trey Ogden, and it was his debut. So there's a big unknown coming into any fighter's debut. And I should have known to not lay minus 250 on him or whatever he was. Because the risk I'm taking, a fighter not performing on their debut, which happens all the time in MMA, in the UFC, it wasn't worth the reward, which was minus 250 money line. So understand about guessing in MMA. You want to minimize it as much as possible.